my name's Adam Jenkins. I'm the Esri's Conservation Account Manager. I went to school for conservation biology. Conservation is really important to me personally, and I get to work in a job where sort of technology and conservation kind of come together. And so I'm excited to have some folks here to talk with us today about a couple of different topics as it sort of relates to that. I have Eric from NatureServe, so Eric's going to come up, and we're going to show a short video. So if you weren't at the Esri Users Conference this year, NatureServe had sort of 10 minutes on the stage, and I think it's really key because one of the things I sort of wanted to kind of like focus on is sort of three different pieces to this evening's kind of session, is that importance of not just thinking about I collect data, but then what do I do with it, right? And how does it become information that we combine into something useful that actually drives decisions? Because at the end of the day, if we're out there and we're spending these furious hours in the field, gathering information from lots of sources, and we're not thinking about how people consume it and then use it and then make some other kind of decision, whether it's a policymaker that you want to understand that here's critical habitat and you kind of mowing through this with this development project is going to have this impact, right? Like we need to be thinking about how the information that we gather drives kind of decision making. So that's, I think, kind of key and important. So actually, Eric, I think I'll play the video and then I'll have you come up. That way you don't have to stand for a little. Yeah, great.
Thank you, Jack. NatureServe is a biodiversity information network, part of the intelligent nervous system for conserving the diversity of life. In every state in the US, all the countries of Latin America, and every province in Canada, the NatureServe network produces essential information for species and ecosystems, where they are found, and the degree to which they are imperiled. For over 50 years, our information standards and our shared technology have connected the data and people of the NatureServe network. Today, using Microsoft cloud computing and Esri's modern tools, we are able to generate, analyze, and share biodiversity data at a pace and scale never before possible. Today, we are unveiling the first high-resolution view to where our nation's most imperiled species are found. We've produced detailed maps of the geographic distribution of over 2,000 species at risk: plants and animals, vertebrates and invertebrates, both aquatic and terrestrial. We then stacked these maps to see what we've never seen before. We can identify the places that matter for sustaining our nation's biodiversity. Look just to the north of us, in the area around Los Angeles. These brightest colors indicate where multiple threatened species still have remaining habitat in one of the most densely populated urban areas on the planet. Or over here to the southeastern US, an area that is experiencing explosive growth. But these bright colors indicate it's still filled with habitat for threatened species, not only on land, but also in the rivers. This map is not just a static data layer. It's an interactive map. We can ask, which species at risk? How many? Are they butterflies, crayfish, or salamanders? How imperiled are they? This map provides conservation intelligence for better, smarter decisions.
But where does that intelligence come from? How can we say with certainty that the mountains near Santa Monica or the Gulf Coast of Florida are the keys to sustaining biodiversity and our natural heritage? Answering that question takes three things: an army of sensors, infrastructure to bring data together, and the best of data science to turn that information into knowledge. The army of sensors, that's NatureServe's network of botanists and zoologists, over 1,000 strong. Through decades of fieldwork, we've been collecting data like this. These polygons represent documented occurrences of our nation's very most imperiled species. Behind these shapes, we maintain detailed information on the species they represent, like the frosted flatwood salamander, which NatureServe has assessed to be globally imperiled, and which is listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. We know these data aren't perfect. They represent only where we've had opportunities to survey. And you can see on this map there's some gaps. In parts of Nevada or down here in Alabama, are there no records there because there's no imperiled species? Or is it just because we haven't looked? That's where data science comes in. With Esri technology and support from Microsoft's AI for Earth program, we've built a spatial modeling infrastructure in the cloud that allows our scientists from New York to Arizona to work together. And together, we're filling in these blank places on the map. We're doing it by building predictive distribution models for thousands of species. Let me show you how, using a Jupyter notebook. The map Healy shared combined data for many species, but we're going to start with just one, our flatwood salamander. This little guy is a great representative for all imperiled species. The first ingredient in better maps is our documented occurrence data, shown here in green for the salamander. We can then bring in predictors to characterize the environment, things like percent canopy, slope, temperature, and distance to water. And then, one of my favorite parts, we can run open science tools like R together with ArcGIS Pro, using machine learning algorithms like random forests to explore the relationship between the salamander and the environment. There's a bunch of simplified code, and then we could see which variables are most important for predicting habitat. We can run tests to see how well our models perform. And then, most importantly, we can generate new maps. Here, again, you see the salamander location data in green. But now underneath it, we have a probability surface showing where on the landscape conditions are most suitable for the species. And on top of that, here in yellow, we've delineated just those areas most likely to provide habitat. This becomes our new salamander map. The inputs and outputs are all documented here, making our science transparent and reproducible. We now have a prediction of salamander habitat. But how can we be sure that prediction's any good? The answer, again, is collaborative science. We've built this web application that allows the experts in our network and collaborating partners to view our results. And we hope someday soon to extend this application to engage citizen scientists like some of you. Our model reviewers can see the predicted habitat shown here in yellow and tell us how well they think the models do. They can enter geographically specific feedback and even bring in their own data to see how it compares. I'm going to drop in some points from one of our network programs, the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. When I do this, you'll immediately see that we haven't predicted any habitat down here where scientists in Florida have documented the species in the past. That information becomes part of a dynamic process, allowing us to continually refine maps. By tapping into human expertise and machine learning, we've built a process where the data for decision-making becomes better and better.
So how does the collaborative science that Regan described actually help balance the needs of society with our need to sustain the natural world? We'll explore the answer through our little salamander, although the story is very much the same for any of the species that we've modeled. Across the range of the salamander, we know change is coming. This is an analysis by Clark Labs that identifies natural areas that are vulnerable to development. Whether that pressure is from agriculture or infrastructure, housing or industry, our decisions will determine the impacts of that development. What places are so important we should avoid them altogether? How do we minimize the impacts that are inevitable? And where do we invest in restoration and mitigation? For most species at risk, the answer to those questions comes from coarse maps. For example, to fulfill their legal mandate to protect listed species like our salamander, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service starts with range maps, like this shown here in white, that delineate county boundaries where the species is thought to occur. But salamanders don't care about county boundaries. And that habitat doesn't exist everywhere within those counties. Coarse range maps limit the precision of our decisions that should be spatially explicit. Let's take a closer look. Within the orange areas that are vulnerable, there might be an engineer working on a road improvement project, or an energy entrepreneur siting a new solar farm. They need to know if endangered species might be affected by their activities. But if the only data available are county boundaries, it appears there's significant conflict. Time and resources are spent on regulatory burdens in areas where the salamander may not even exist. But with the fine-scale habitat map shown here in yellow, the potential conflicts can be reduced or even eliminated. Where salamanders and development do coincide, we can be smarter about planning. Field surveys can be more targeted, the siting of projects might be adjusted, and the most sensitive areas can be avoided. We've created these maps not just for the frosted flatwood salamander, but for all imperiled amphibians. For threatened freshwater species, such as mussels and crayfish. For pollinators at risk, such as butterflies. For the first time ever, we have a map of our nation's most imperiled plant species, over 1,000 of them. Combining all these groups, this map provides high-fidelity information to make smarter decisions, reduce conflict, and guide conservation actions. Using these data, we're working with the Nature Conservancy, a major supporter of this project, to determine the highest returns on our conservation investments. Our country has already set aside almost 10% of the lands and waters of the continental US as protected areas, designated for conservation and recreation. Now we are able to ask which places have the most species at risk that fall outside those protected areas. Again, we can see what we've never seen before. The darkest red colors here show us where multiple threatened species occur entirely outside our conservation estate, that 10% that we've protected. Investments in these places can prevent extinctions. The map of biodiversity importance unveiled today is just the first view of a living map, one that will evolve as part of the intelligent nervous system for conservation. Enabled by technology, NatureServe is bringing together data and people to dynamically refine this map so we can better balance the needs of people and nature in a rapidly changing world. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're going to have Eric come up and tell us a little bit about NatureServe and the work that they've been doing recently since the users conference. I can advance the slide for you, okay?
I can advance them. Thank you, Seth. Yeah. So this is the biodiversity importance map. It's overlaid with that protected areas, that 10% that Healy was talking about, and then down here in the left-hand corner we have yes, it's the part of a small part of North Carolina down there. And if we can click in and zoom down into this smaller section down near the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and we can see really where this is a 30 by 30 meter grid that that the biodiversity, that's what makes up the map of biodiversity. And so you can really see in these blocks where we can target our conservation needs. So down here in this clay area, we can really figure out that we need to, have land protection down there, and just work our way towards that.
What is the resolution?
30 meters, yeah, 30 meters resolution across the country. So it might be zoomed out here. I'm not 100% sure, but it is a 30 meter resolution. So to get to that map, we started with draft habitat models that we developed with Esri and our NatureServe network. We then refined those habitat models with what Regan was talking about through all the programming tools that we have available. And then we we do that field analysis, and we can go out and find new areas that using those models to really define the gold standard of biodiversity location data. So that includes the spatial models and those known occurrences that we, as a network, are gathering. So the way we get that information into the hands of the public and those decision makers, we are redeveloping our portal to our data. NatureServe Explorer was developed in 2004 and has not been updated since. So in January, we'll be launching the new version of NatureServe Explorer that is a public access to the authoritative conservation information on the species that we are tracking. We have over 90,000 species in our database, and it'll have interactive maps. It'll be they'll have downloadable data, and it'll be mobile responsive, which will be helpful when you're out in the field trying to look something up quickly. Oh, the wrong way. There we go. So this is really trying to focus in on what are the key parts of conservation data. So we want to know what it is. It's the Brasso flatwood salamander. We want to know how it's doing. So it's imperiled, and that's right in our face. Very important for us to know. And then where it is. So we have a map placeholder here as we're generating all these maps. But we can have the known location map there. We can then also add the predicted habitat, and then we have all sorts of extra information on these species. So you can find out what it eats, where it is, what's more conservation status. So you can look up the USCSA, the Canadian Sarah and Cozywick ranks, and then kind of know how viable it is and what actions we need to take from that. So how do we get there? We have many network partners, over 60 plus across the Western Hemisphere. They all have their own local database that automatically and has continuous updates with our central database that goes back and forth. From there, we're working towards including that modeling engine that Regan and Haley talked about, so that it'll automatically update as new data is generated. So somebody in the field could update this known location, runs through a model, and then is populated into our NatureServe Explorer tool. So it'll have a continuous refresh process. It'll be dynamic, and really just is getting that data to decision makers quickly. From here, this is a prototype mock-up of a tool coming in 2020. It'll be our pro version of NatureServe Explorer, where you can go in, draw your project, figure out what the imperiled species are, what actions you would need to take, sort of from there, and then it would link you to state and local laws that you need to take action from. And that leads us to the environmental review tools. These we've developed with our state partners, and we have 9 right now, almost 11. They're growing. We get another partner to take in this environmental review tool, and this really is. They have the state agencies have a responsibility to screen projects that come through in their state for threatened and endangered species. So what we've done is automate this process and drive forward making it easier for users to submit projects, and then also for the reviewers to review those projects. In these tools, so we have 11 projects right now. Approximately 30,000 projects are submitted annually. We have partners in Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, just to name a few. And then there is a story map that we don't have to go into right now, but it details a lot of the information that's available on these environmental review tools. Really what we're trying to do with this information is reduce conflict, protect the biodiversity, and with these tools that we're building, we're increasing the impact of the data there, over 70% of the projects result in no conflict, no action needed, or have voluntary conservation measures. And that's really important for both the users and the state agencies, because it saves time and money for everyone. So yeah, it's kind of a win-win for everyone, conservation and building. So,
great. Thanks, Eric. So I think when I think about GIS and the useful uses of it, like often we started that process, we find information, we find other people's information, because we're GIS people. We understand that, sometimes the value of my data becomes so much more when I enrich it with something else. Like thinking about, sometimes I think we can get our blinkers on so much that we look at data and we just like my data and my quality of my data, and sometimes we forget like what other sources of data are out there to kind of enrich. In this process of going from data to information that is valuable for people, hearing about decision making, using this sort of valuable kind of range maps of like that are more high fidelity, that have some kind of real analysis kind of wrapped into it. If you think about like how all of us consume information today, like it's on this thing we have as a smartphone, like we're looking at the funny cat video from YouTube or somebody's Instagram, right? Like people are used to consuming digital information. And I think anyone in the room here probably could agree that the complexity and depth of what you do in conservation and the value of it and what comes from that sort of meticulous study of things, you've got to turn it into something palatable, right? Whether it's for your manager who's two tiers up the chain, is like, what does your department even do? And you're trying to like, how do I explain this to them? Or, like, none of us have ever had that conversation before. Or whether it's the public, or whether it's people that are potentially going to donate to your organization, understand the value and impact for it. So I wanted to have Ross Donahue come up from the Story Maps team and talk a little bit about creative uses of story maps for conservation, and cover a little bit of what's new to story maps in the last little while. So thanks, Ross.
Cool. So hey everybody, I'm Ross Donahue. I'm a cartographer on the Story Maps editorial team. We're based here in the DC office. We're local, so if you ever have questions, just get in touch. You can always come over. We can do a little one-on-one session. The rest of our team is based out in Redlands. So those are the developers, designers are spread out. But here on the editorial team, what we're doing is we're helping you guys get started with our tools. We create story maps that represent best practices. We provide help documentation, so blog posts, and we do partnerships with a lot of organizations. Some of you are in the room, and we're really excited to help build capacity for storytelling with organizations. So I thought I'd start out just make sure everybody is on the same page with what a story map is, and then showcase some of the creative uses of story maps, talk about the roadmap for the product. So first, just a quick show of hands, how many people have made a story map before? Okay, so about 3/4 of the room. That's really exciting. So some of you might be familiar with the classic templates, but in July, we just launched a new product called ArcGIS Story Maps. How many people have tried out this new product, ArcGIS Story Maps? Show of hands. Okay, so we've got a fewer number. So that's perfect. What I'll be talking about is this new product, the transition and why we're doing this transition, and then answer questions at the end about what's happening with the classic templates. What happens to stories that I've already created, but there's this new product, how do I convert over to those? So just really briefly, I want to talk about what a story map is. So story maps are web apps that allow you to combine interactive maps with rich multimedia, that's photos, videos, and text, to really tell stories about the world. And we've been really excited to see all the interest from the conservation community to use these digital storytelling tools. They're responsive, they work on a variety of screens. They have very simple drag and drop builders. So it's really easy to add content, remove content, move that content around, to really tailor it to your own story. They're hosted by Esri, so you don't have to worry about maintenance and if a link is broken because a JavaScript library was updated, we're taking care of that for you. And we're really excited to see this growth in the number of story maps that are being created. We just, in this year, reached over 1 million story maps that have been hosted by Esri. So we're really excited about that. And I should mention that I'm actually presenting in the new ArcGIS story maps. This is a feature called Collections, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It's in beta, but it essentially allows you to combine story maps that you've created into a presentation or a series of story maps. So at any time, you can click this drop down and see what's coming next. You can also just advance to the next item in your story. And so first, I thought I'd outline why we're transitioning to this new product, seeing how the majority of you have used story maps, but maybe used the classic templates. So over the last 8 years, story maps has gotten a lot of feedback from the users. You guys have given us tons of feedback about things you like, things you don't like. And after all of that feedback, we've realized one of the main issues are with the classic templates. We have 8 different templates that you can use when you just start out. And so users are telling us, which one do I start with? Oh, I like this one, so I start down that path, and then, oh, it turns out I want this other feature. It doesn't work as well on mobile or something like that. And so instead of having multiple different templates, we've created one unified builder experience. So instead of having to choose those templates, you're in one builder, and then you add different blocks of content, depending on the user experience you want your readers to have. So that, to begin with, is making it simpler for people to get started. Second, it shouldn't be so hard for people to incorporate maps into their stories. Maps are these really powerful tools to center your readers on place-based storytelling. And so we've created this lightweight mapping tool called Express Maps. This is really just meant for simple maps that have points, lines, or polygons, but they provide context for your readers as they're getting started. So these aren't supposed to be really detailed thematic maps. That's where you go into ArcGIS Online or into Pro. These are great for locator maps, showing a series of points, things like that. Third, a lot of organizations don't have huge teams to be able to create these really immersive digital stories. They don't have maybe a graphic designer and then a developer and a GIS professional and a video editor and all these other people. And so we wanted to have the default design be functional for the majority of the use cases. So with one click, you can change the fonts, you can change the themes, you can change the overall look and feel of your story without having to spend a lot of time coding things or going really deep into the weeds. So it should be easier and faster for people to make stories. Fourth, one of the big bits of feedback is people would forget to click save in the classic story maps, and I'm sure we've all experienced that and lost content because of it. And so with this updated version, there's autosave integrated right into it. It also allows you to, save and publish stories really easily. Fifth, we're optimizing how content loads. So load times are improving significantly. If you upload a photo that's far too large for your audience or for the browser, then we'll downsize it for you. Things like that make it much faster, and especially with mobile audiences. And speaking of mobile audiences, it's designed for mobile first design. So you're able to you don't have to think about how you're going to design this or create a version just for mobile. All of that's baked into the code itself. There's lots of new enhancements coming all the time. I'll talk a little bit about that more later. But we're really excited about how we're seeing people use this new tool. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about next, is some of the ways that conservation organizations specifically are using ArcGIS story maps in their work and to build capacity for their organizations to be able to do more with less. So this is just again, ArcGIS story maps, and this is one of the features is a scrolling experience. It's called a sidecar block. And so what I've done is I've gone through a bunch of those new story maps that are conservation themed and found some of the really exciting ways people are using story maps. So first, creating a call to action. So motivating your readers to act and take charge on a given issue. This one was about the illegal wildlife trade and building a social media campaign around taking that on. Another one is showing stories from the field. So this is one of the things that we really want to encourage users to do, which is showcase the work of people within your organization and tell stories about their field work, using them as entry points into the larger work of your organization. So this story is about the work of Alex Tate, who's the geographer at National Geographic Society, and an expedition that he went on to map base camp at Mount Everest. And this I'll walk you through this briefly, but it uses the first person perspective. So immediately you're drawn in by this character-driven story. This is a really effective technique for engaging your readers. Readers are bombarded with tons of information. So using techniques like this keeps them on your page longer and makes them more engaged. Something that Adam mentioned earlier was the ability to integrate other analysis and other kind of mapping tools directly into story maps, and being able to kind of magnify the impact of all this effort that's spent doing the analysis. So here we've started out learning about Alex a little bit, and then now we're getting the background of the expedition, how Nat Geo has worked with them in the past. And then he uses things like really compelling imagery to take us into the base camp, look at the tools that they're using on the ground. They created amazing high-resolution imagery, and so story maps allows you to show off that media content. Drone imagery looks great in story maps. And so all you have to do is embed a link from YouTube or Vimeo directly in. So one of the things that they did was create a high-resolution aerial image of base camp. So you can see all of the different tents that are set up there. This has never been done before. And again, it's just super stunning imagery, right? It's a lot of people up there, yeah. And they also use some really clever ways of displaying change over time. So this is, the best available satellite imagery before the expedition, since what they collected later with drones. And so now we're invested in the story, and we're starting to learn about climate change and how things are changing on at the base camp. and how their work will help document that change and communicate it out to a wider audience. We also flew LiDAR. They've got so much data now on Everest. And kind of in conclusion, they're able to speak to the larger trends that are happening in the region. So, readers are able to stay engaged throughout the story. You can speak to a wider message, and then they have a call to action where you can learn more about the expedition. That was one of the big goals of the story. And so, unfortunately, not all of us have access to this, amazing media that Geo does. But there are some really great publicly available sources of data and imagery that, if you're interested in that, we can talk later about some of the resources that we use when we don't have, amazing drone imagery at centimeter resolution of far remote places. Some of you might have seen this. This was one of our kind of showcase stories when the product first came out. The goal of this was to take a kind of dry report, scientific report, and then display it using a story map so that people gain awareness about what the scientific findings of the report were, which is all about giraffes and how they thought they were all subspecies, but actually they're their own unique species. So again, using maps and multimedia to create a call to action and engage people. This is an example of an express map. So, it's very lightweight, it loads fast, it has nice tooltips and pop-ups, and you can add media really quickly. Again, call to action. Okay, let's cruise through some of these others. This is, have anybody seen this story map yet? It's a crowdsourced application. So what we did was we combined a couple of the different tools that Esri has. Survey 123 was one of them, and then ArcMap, where you can have scenes and you can have live mapping data where people submit a point using the form and it populates in real time on this interactive map. And then you can style the map with pop-ups and things to make a compelling visual that engages people around an issue in a way that's more engaging. And the Audubon Society is actually about to launch one for the 100th anniversary of the Christmas bird count. 120, thank you. Bird nerd over here. And so definitely be on the lookout for that. If you're a part of the Christmas bird count community, submit to it. It's going to be a really exciting effort. This was a collaboration that we did with another team at Esri where they were launching the protected area management solution. And so, what can be sort of a complicated idea turned out to be a really effective story map that they use a lot in their presentations and when they're talking about it. So it's a resource that really succinctly kind of talks about the problem, the context, and then is able to kind of walk into some more specifics. This was a really exciting initiative to work on, and part of the outreach solution is using story maps to be able to build capacity for organizations to tell more stories and without needing as many resources to do that. And as part of this, we've started doing storytelling workshops with National Geographic in Africa to be able to help train people as well as just build storytelling capacity with their expertise in our technology, essentially. I'm going to keep moving on here. I'll make these slides available afterwards so people can dig into them more. But here are a couple others telling the stories of species. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, broad kind of like a general report, but you can actually use the species itself as the main character within your story. You know, a lot of the places that your organizations work in have species that are really the flagship or mascot species for the issues that are going on. NatureServe, you know, you could use this all the time, that approach. And so definitely want to encourage folks to take innovative approaches to how they tell their story. We have some of the creators of this story map in the audience, Blue Raster. This was a really exciting collaboration in the lead up to user conference to be able to showcase the Jane Goodall Institute's approach to conservation. So taking this Takari principles and distilling it down into this visual that is engaging and communicates the need and why this approach is effective. Okay, so let's see, I want to leave time for questions at the end, but I want to just talk briefly about what's coming next. So every 2 months or so, we have new enhancements coming to our GIS story maps. There are new block types. So these are different user experiences that you can incorporate as you're authoring your story map. And along with that, let me just show you a little bit. So for example, in October, we released this slideshow block. So this is the ability to incorporate a series of images, a slideshow of images directly into your story map. So it's really easy to get more media in there. There were refinements to you know, the overall interface, and really just allowing you to have more customization and options. In future releases, if you're familiar with the classic templates, Map Tour is coming, should be end of January. Story Actions will also be coming. Express Map will have new features, more formatting options. Printing is going to be easier. So for those of you who need offline usage or want to have the ability to export them out, that's also coming. That said, if there are enhancements or requirements that you guys have for the new product, definitely let us know. We want to hear about those things. And this is an exciting time because we can communicate that to the developers who are writing those tools in. If we found out about that 6 months from now, it might be a lot harder to incorporate those features in. Okay, so I want to again, thank you all for coming. We're really excited to see what you create with these tools. If you ever have a story map that you want feedback on, you can send us an email at storymapsreview@esri.com. Again, storymapsreview@esri.com. We don't publicize this to a lot of people. It's only at workshops like this, so we don't get bombarded with so many that we can't help out. But what'll happen is when you send us that email, that notifies 3 or 4 of us on the team, and then we'll respond with some tips for how to improve or ways that we could maybe help elevate your story through our social media channels and through other kind of maybe partners could spread as well. Also, we're always sharing out lots of new content and features on our Twitter page. So if you're active on Twitter, our handle is ArcGIS Story Maps. Check it out. There's also lots of links here. We've revamped the Story Maps website. There's also our blog where we have lots of tips and tricks. We have updates for the product, things like that. We've got a newsletter, and there's lots of new things coming. For those of you who are wondering what's going to happen with the classic story maps, either the ones that you've created or ones that you're planning to make, nothing will change until 2021. July 2021, they move into extended support. That means that you can still create and edit existing ones, but there won't be new enhancements or new features going into those. And then 2024 is when they go into mature support. Again, you'll never lose access to your story maps, but when, say Google Chrome changes everything, that's kind of when we'll reduce the amount of maintenance that we're doing on that product. So, 5 years from now, and if there needs to be an update to that, let us know and we'll incorporate that feedback. And we've already pushed it back once, likely push it back further if needed by the storytelling community.
Thanks, Ross.
Yeah, so.
We have time for a couple quick questions. So.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is really cool, and I love, and I can always try it.
Yeah.
But, so, couple questions.
Go for it.
Is it free? Do you have a pro version? Okay, perfect. Can you upload videos with audio? And I'm interested to see how people are integrating this. Like, can you integrate it on your website, or how are you?
Yeah, all great questions. So,
Can I ask you a question real quickly? What part of the organization do you work in?
So I do marketing.
And this is like a classic example. I would encourage every GIS person in the room to go find your communications and marketing people. Go have a conversation with them. They're great people, and they really they need to be more connected to GIS folks, because maps tell great stories, and your marketing folks need to know that. Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. Okay, so first about the cost, free version versus public version. There is a public option. What happens is it cuts you off from the ArcGIS online ecosystem, so you essentially won't be able to use things like ArcGIS Online, some of those other mapping functionalities. There's also special blocks that you don't get access to with the public. You still author them. When you publish them, they're all going to be public. There's no kind of private because you don't have an ArcGIS Online account. If you have ArcGIS Online, you have access to story maps. And so, nonprofit licensing is like $100. And so, if you have specific questions about licensing, we can talk about that. Let's see. Another question was about videos.
Yeah, like if you can share audio.
Yeah. So, there's two ways to embed video. There's an actual block where you can just put URL video in. If you want to have things like auto looping, like auto playing, auto looping, muted, if you want to change the iframe size, you can just embed in an iframe code specifically. So if you're in YouTube, for instance, and you have some parameters where you want it to auto play when somebody scrolls down, you can just put that all in, and the program will recognize that. And the sound, it's opted out for sound. That's a browser requirement. A lot of browsers won't autoplay sound, but it's enabled when you use it.
And then I was curious how people are integrating it into the
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so when you publish a story and make it public, there's an easy way for you to just click share on Facebook, share on Twitter, right here. You can also copy the URL, and with that, URL, you can put it into another social media platform, create Bitly. You can create an iframe and embed it directly into your website. Sometimes people on their websites will have a tab for, great case of point. You know, you click on the banner and you have an actual link to the story there. We're also seeing people create collections of stories. So if you have a particular issue, whether it's biodiversity, whether it's land conservation, whether it's social justice, and you have a bunch of story maps about that topic, you can package those up into a collection, which unfortunately I don't have a ton of time to go deep into, but it works the same way. You can share it Facebook, Twitter, link, and that too.
Thanks.
Aren't you an enterprise support?
Yeah.
Control the DNS. I know it's going to be posted by
Yeah.
Project.
Yeah. So with enterprise support and world users, whichever term you use, that's in the roadmap, but it's, you know, there's a lag time, right? With all these features. So we're hoping that it will be July 2020. That's optimistic, but really pushing for it. The number of people that I'm already dreading Fed GIS because the number of people who are going to say, "Oh, we really want this today," but they understand that there's a lag. So we'll be previewing this. Oh, other question was about how
DNS.
DNS. That's for you guys.
Yeah, I can get back to. I can get back to.
For example, they want it to be like
Yeah.
trees that.
Oh, custom URLs.
Custom URLs.
Yeah.
So
So
it's still hosted by a different line, but a lot of
no, definitely. Yeah. So what we've been doing right now, and it's great to hear, like, how many other people would like to have custom style? Yeah, everybody there. Me too. So right now you can't create a custom URL directly within the builder. So what a lot of people use are link shorteners, things like Bitly. You also get analytics. So
features.
so that's an enhancement that I'll communicate to the dev team, and hopefully that'll get bumped up in the roadmap. But it's something that we've heard.
Yep. So I think I'm going to reserve questions because we are running a little bit behind, and I have someone else that I want to do. But Ross is going to be here afterwards, and so feel free to come up and ask questions as well. But thank you, Ross. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, great. So for the next piece that we're going to kind of talk about here, you know, I think stories are great, right? Like they're a really useful way for us to engage with people, to build awareness, to like break down complex things into more palatable kind of pieces. You know, I think another, like just a show of hands, who in the room knows what ArcGIS Hub is? They heard of ArcGIS Hub? Who in the room's used it with volunteers? Okay, cool. Well, I'm just gonna see here. This back again. Ricky, are you on the phone? Can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Great. Did you want to check on your video as well, and we could see you?
Yeah, sure.
Here we go. We've got Ricky joining us from Bozeman, right?
Yep, Bozeman, Montana.
So if you want to introduce yourself, Ricky, I'll let you do that.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Like Adam said, my name is Ricky Jones. I'm the technology coordinator for the nonprofit Adventure Scientists based in Bozeman, Montana. And we specialize in connecting researchers, scientists, partners who need data with the outdoor community, whether that be rock climbers, mountain bikers, road cyclists, just your average weekend warrior hiker, so that they can fill in data gaps in areas that the scientists or the partners themselves wouldn't be able to access on their own. So that's kind of our niche in the community is getting those outdoor adventurers out there and collecting data.
Great. And so I had asked Ricky to come and take some time today to talk a little bit about this project that he's working on. Ride for Roadkill, and it's a wildlife connectivity study that they're doing in Montana. But show of hands, who wants to go to Montana and ride a bicycle around? We go, Ricky. We got a whole lot of hands. So this is a neat project, and so I wanted to give Ricky the opportunity to talk a little bit about it. Under the hood, the way that he's essentially kind of like helping to manage the volunteers is through ArcGIS Hub. And so some people, who in the room sort of open data sites? Like, everyone's pretty much heard of open data sites. Esri did this fun thing where we call them ArcGIS Hub sites. And so being able to disseminate data as a data-driven web page is essentially how I like to think about them, that the information comes from ArcGIS Online or from groups of content in your GIS is something that we've probably heard about for a few years. ArcGIS Hub comes in kind of two flavors. It comes in the regular flavor and it comes in a Hub Premium. Hub Premium includes the ability to have real identities for your volunteers. And what does that actually mean? It means that when people sign up to be part of a specific initiative that you've kind of curated in Hub, that you kind of know who they are and you can interact with them on a more kind of closer, intimate sort of level. You can have them interact with pieces of your GIS in that more sort of kind of intimate level. So it kind of gives you this just not anonymous volunteering, but some way to really have more of a stronger kind of interaction with them and set them up with potentially some ArcGIS tools to do some of those things. So I don't know, Ricky, if you just wanted to tell us like a little bit about like Ride for Roadkill, how did like adventure scientists kind of come to this? Like, and then like, maybe at the same time, a little bit of like why you guys like thought Hub might be a good idea to help.
Right, yeah, sure. So this project has been in the works for about 5 years now, and it originally started as a global project, which you can actually still sign up for on our website, but we're prioritizing the Montana version of it. And so with this project, we've partnered with the Montana Department of Transportation and Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And the goal is to cover 11,000 miles of roadway via road cycling to observe roadkill or living animals on the roadways that are essentially potentially conflicting with vehicles on the road. And so the goal is to identify hotspots where wildlife vehicle collisions are occurring more frequently in order to inform decisions for Montana Department of Transportation, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, where they can put mitigation structures like overpasses, underpasses, wildlife fencing, those sorts of things. And so our role in this is to cover the ground that Montana Department of Transportation and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks can't cover on their own. A lot of people also ask us, why aren't you just driving? And it's because if you drive, you end up driving a lot faster than if you bike, which is pretty obvious. But the idea is that the cyclists see more, and that's kind of been the motto of this project is cyclists see more, so we need more cyclists. And so we're seeing roadkill that people in cars don't normally see. It's really easy to see like an elk or a deer that got hit on the side of the road, but the smaller animals and the birds typically get missed. So we're filling in those not only roadway miles that a lot of cars don't drive, but the smaller gaps in the data as well of different species.
Great, thanks, Ricky. And so, put together a simple story map just to sort of show some of the kind of roadways here. And you guys have gone through your first field season.
Yep.
And, that was a bit of a test, right, to see how things would work. And can you tell us a little bit in terms of like just the general feedback of kind of people collecting things this way versus the way that you guys had done it kind of prior? Yeah.
So this field season was in, I believe, October, kind of end of September, and then early October. And it was, it was a bit of a test. And it was also interesting as we had 2 major snowstorms occur during our window of availability to survey. And so people weren't very excited to ride bikes during the snowstorms. But we had about 50 people go out and ride. And so the blue lines in this map are where we got out and surveyed during that period. And so in the past, we've had people just go out and we'll say, hey, go like ride your bike. You can hike, you can walk, you can rollerblade. We don't care. Like get along the road and, just go out and do your thing and observe the whatever you see. And this year we changed it in the way mostly based off of our study design. And if you see those numbers on each of those line segments, we basically divvied up sections of the highway into about 50 mile segments. So they're 25 miles out and then 25 miles back on the other side of the highway. And so the goal with this is a little bit of management and also, like I said, study design to better understand within each area. That way we're kind of getting a temporal temporal scale and also a spatial scale to understand a little bit better how certain areas could have hotspots as opposed to others. And so when people go out and ride, they do each segment in a consecutive ride. And so they ride out 25 miles and then ride back another 25. And that way we avoid weird confounding variables in that, like, if there was, like, after a major snowstorm, if they had ridden the first 10 miles before the snowstorm and then ridden the last 10 miles after, well, the road conditions were a lot worse afterwards or during the snowstorm. So it's more likely that there was more roadkill after the snowstorm. And so they ride that second half and they're like, oh, wow, this section of it is way worse than the previous section. But really, it was just the snowstorm. And so we kind of divvied it up into these segments. And we also initiated it with what we're talking about now is Hub Premium. And so in the past with our global project, we were using iNaturalist, which is a great app, and it's got a great community on it to help identify some of the species that are on there. But we just couldn't scale like we could, and we couldn't manage the data well enough through iNaturalist. And so using the Esri Hub system, we were able to better manage our volunteers and the data essentially at the same time, because the volunteer management and data collection were in the same system. Not to mention, now we get to play with really cool maps and story maps straight out of Arc Online. Don't even have to really download it into a desktop version or export the data out of the third-party app that we're using. It's just all contained in this system. And so the efficiency that I'm able to work with the data is a lot quicker, which has been really awesome.
Yeah, because Ricky, you have a really big team, right?
So big. So big.
Great. Well, thanks for going through that, Ricky. I really appreciate it. So, like field season 1, you kind of got through, right? Like I think you said there's about sort of 50 kind of volunteers, a little over 350 kind of structured observations of kind of different wildlife. There was a lot of, as you said, there was a lot of kind of observations around kind of the sort of Bozeman kind of area with some of these main trunks.
Yeah.
And being able to sort of see this information, and people kind of go out and kind of collect it. I think one thing was sort of interesting too is that in the Esri Living Atlas of the World, there's these green infrastructure layers that exist, right, where they've done some least cost path analysis to say where the connectors go. And just this is an analysis, it's just some simple overlay. It was interesting to see that some of these least cost paths, like straight through where they were seeing specific kind of fatalities for wildlife as well. And so that was kind of interesting. But, part of can you tell us a little bit about sort of the setup for how these volunteers are collecting this information? Like, what are they doing to actually kind of collect this in the field? Like, what are they using typically?
Sure. So volunteers are all signed up to Survey 123. And so once they create their Adventure Scientists Hub account, which is like it's the community account, and so it gives them access to Esri products in a sense that they can sign in to Survey 123 and have access to the content in there that I've specified from grouping them into a specific group on the Hub account. And so when volunteers go out into the field, they've got a survey on Survey 123 downloaded to their phone, so that they can access it offline, which is key, because a lot of these places don't have any cellular coverage. They're in mountainous regions or anything like that, just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And so they'll go out and ride along the side of the road, and if they see wildlife on the side of the road or even on the road, they'll take out their phone and take photos, take some metadata in the form of like, obviously location, time, animal's location relative to the road, whether it is alive or dead. A couple others, like location, relative to the road. And then they also, they use a scale bar in their photos so that we can kind of help identify the animal later on. That's kind of and then they do that for 25 miles out one direction and then 25 miles out the other direction.
Great. Thanks, Ricky.
Mm-hmm.
So outcomes, right? Like there was, out this 357 observations, I think, it looks like from kind of your outcomes, like ungulates are obviously, or sort of larger mammals maybe are a large portion of this. It was interesting to read that statistic at the top of the story map of just, how much, if you think of it from an economic perspective, even just how much economics beyond, the cost also to biodiversity. I think sometimes when we can tie those two things together, like the cost of us doing, things that benefit nature and humans, I think often gets people kind of moving in the right direction faster. So yeah, like another plug for Ricky and this Montana, like, if you like, riding through Montana, I would encourage you to go check out their website and learn more about the project and what's kind of going on and the opportunity to kind of sign up and become a part of it. I think it's a neat kind of data set that's going to kind of come from it. How many sort of years or how long are you looking to kind of do this, and then what's going to happen with the information once you're finished with it?
Yeah, so this is a 4-year study. So we just essentially finished up our first year, which is a shorter year since it was just that first field season. But the next 3 years, we're going to be riding 4 times a year, hopefully in no snow is the goal. And so we'll have a lot of time to refine our study and our field days for the next 4 years. And then eventually that data will go to the Department of Transportation and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks so they can figure out how they want to go about building mitigation structures.
Great. Cool. Excellent. There's some more information here. I will be sure to share the links out to all the story maps and content that people have had. But questions from people in the room. Anyone? Any questions for Ricky or for me? Yes.
I was just wondering, what are the benefits of using Hub versus just using GIS Online?
Yeah.
From your perspective.
Sure. So the question, Ricky, I don't know if you heard it, was what's the benefits of using ArcGIS Hub versus using just ArcGIS Online, right? And so I think at one piece of it, you've got this concept of having, information flows in from volunteers, and you can do that via a public survey, right? Like you can say, any man and his dog, give me information that I can then sift through and try and figure out how this becomes valuable. With ArcGIS Hub Premium, you give people identity, which allows them to have private submission of that information. It gives you the ability to take that, do something with it before you present it out to other people. And so I think in some ways, there's that sort of like, how are we collecting information, and is it just anonymously and that's valuable and we can distill that, or is it more thoughtful and we need them to like either have access to certain things and ArcGIS Online that they can't do publicly, right? And so there's that kind of component to it as well. Because the other piece of it too, Ricky kind of noted, is for somebody to come in and be able to gather information on their phone and submit it through their phone, they needed to have a full account for that, for Survey 123, to have offline access, because they need to take information, potentially private information from that GIS, put it on the device. It gives them context when they're out in the field, and you don't want to just kind of open that up to the world and everybody. So it's kind of like a combination of those. But there's definitely, I've seen Hub initiatives where they drive an initiative it's public. There's no need for identity. There's no need to know exactly who your volunteer is, who's submitting that information. You have to go back to them and say, what is this information that you've submitted? And that can be incredibly valuable. You don't need Hub. So does that kind of answer it? Would you add anything else, Ricky?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is we also promise our partners that our volunteers are trained. And so in order to kind of filter who has access to the form, it can't just be open to the public, because in order to collect data for this project, you have to go through our training program. And so once you go through the training program, that's when you then gain access to the surveys. And so instead of having it public on the web where people could just search for it and find it and contribute data, you have to have gone through that training. So it's like kind of a one way to filter through people.
I guess, but you can use the same account, so the training, and then just they would enter their names and credentials in the form, right? So they could have the same, all the volunteers would have the same login, and they just enter their own names and credentials. So you can still track individual smartphones because it's going to be the metadata for the ID, and they will put their names. So you can still have that connection to individuals, not just one.
Yeah, and I think when you think about it in terms of a data submission, right, like that's one step of a function that a GIS can do, right? Like we can collect data and bring it into a GIS. And I think that the key of identity and how it works across all of ArcGIS as a whole is a valuable thing because people own content. Content becomes valuable to other people, share it, and there's grouping. And so on the roadmap today and in functionality that you see both in ArcGIS Online and in ArcGIS Hub, I think that concept of being able to have, and this is also coming with Hub, is the understanding your team of volunteers isn't just one type of person. Like sometimes you have someone that is potentially a subject matter expert in a specific thing, but then you've got a handful of folks, kind of like what Ricky said, that are weekend warriors, right? That if you were all just sort of one flavor of volunteer, it would be hard to differentiate who's what. And you might get 200 volunteers that are incredibly valuable for this one bioblitz that you do, but out of that, there's 20 individuals that are amazing that you kind of would like to interact with more. And so I think the concept of identity, you will see it continue to develop in ArcGIS Hub in a way that allows you to sort of, kind of have different interactions with different types of volunteers, which would be hard to do if they all had one login and were going through things in just one way.
Also a communication tool. I mean, it's not just collecting data, it's communicating the story map. It's communicating, here's our event, here's our next collection time, here are training materials, etc. So there's so much more to Hub than just the survey 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
question.
Yeah.
For future data collection, will you consider quick capture for this? Because I know a lot of cyclists have little pod, and they could essentially quick capture just to do a single observation. Obviously, not going to photo. I know you have a large team, so.
So the question for you, Ricky, I'll repeat it. So the question was, have you guys considered using quick capture as a way for people to kind of like maybe capture information more rapidly as they're cycling?
Yeah, so I briefly looked at quick capture, but I'm not really familiar with it. But I saw it and I was like, oh, I wonder if that has some potential there. But yeah, I haven't looked at it yet specifically for this project.
Yeah, and one thing that Ricky they did go through with the Montana Department of Transportation, they had them review the protocol. And so there is some things that are in the data model itself that kind of require you, that you could argue are valuable for someone to pause and stop and look and observe and take notes, right? And so, I think quick capture is going to be, useful for lots of things. There'll be some things that, you want people to take more of. Good question. Other questions?
So when I'm curious about I'm new to any of these. So when you say about the survey 1, 2, 3, are they? Is it part of the ArcGIS? And is it part of ArcGIS Online as well? Or?
So Survey 1, 2, 3. If those of you that have never used Survey 1, 2, 3, there's 2 flavors to it. It is an application that sits on top of ArcGIS Online, and it's essentially a survey, right? So you can create different types of form fields, drop downs, conditional logic, what you're used to building sort of into forms. And there's a web designer of it that's really simple that you can basically bake up a survey in minutes to like half an hour. There's also a desktop version of it that's called Survey 1, 2, 3 Connect that takes the XLS form standard and then it uses the XLS form standard to build more logic into your forms themselves. And so you can have pieces of the form that repeat. You can have, if you choose this, only show that section of the form. You can have an informed calculation that says I'm taking a water sample here, and I know these things are here. And so when I enter something into this as the person that's entering it, you're going to run a calculation and spit that out in another field. You can do all of those things in the more complex version of it. And then the person that enters the information, once you've published the form, is doing it from either a mobile device or just from a web browser. And it's all a free app that sits on top of ArcGIS Online as part of ArcGIS Online. And by then connection is part of ArcGIS Hub. Because Hub is essentially the same thing. It uses and consumes the sort of world of ArcGIS Online to make it run. Good question. Any other questions?
So a bit of a follow-up, sorry about that.
No.
Okay, so ArcGIS Online, for example, I publish a map, and I also want to couple it with like a survey. So currently, actually, my team, not me, who did is like I wrote a question on and save it in a geo database, like, and then somebody is going to transform the geo database to that pop-up survey on the desktop version. So are you saying that they can also download that onto a phone app, cell phone app offline for that survey for ArcGIS Hub, or only in ArcGIS Online?
No, it's a good point. And so there's a native application on your mobile device that's Survey 123. So you can download that from Android, iOS, or the Windows Store. And so that then requires you to log in to ArcGIS Online. When you log into ArcGIS Online, Survey 123 looks out to see what groups you have access to, what content that you have already within ArcGIS Online. And one of those content items is a form item. And so when I'm a user and I go into ArcGIS Online and I create a form, what it does is as I'm going through and creating that form, it writes a web service into ArcGIS Online that consumes the data that is coming in from that form. And so what you're doing is you're creating both the form item, how it looks, and the validation for it, but you're also creating the underlying data service. And so once you've started to feed that underlying data service, every time someone from Ricky's volunteers is feeding in those new observations, when you put that web service on a web map, those observations start to show up every time they're submitted to it. But the information on that form and what is in it and where the context of it and all the validation can be brought local so that it is cached on the phone, so that when you're out there, your phone knows, oh, I'm at this GPS location, I'm taking a picture of this said wildlife and I'm taking the notes for it, and it saves it onto your phone and saves that survey. Once you get back to some kind of data connection, you can either choose to send it automatically as soon as you get to a data connection or send them one at a time. Then that writes back into that web service and becomes part of the rest of what the team can use. The connection to the desktop environment is that somebody can take that same web service and on the desktop environment could run a simple hotspot analysis on it, or they could do some other kind of analysis with it straight from the service without ever having to hand this spreadsheet to that person, this thing to another, or whatever else. So, I think that's kind of what Ricky's sort of getting at, is that because it's a part of the rest of the universe, it's easy for people to interact with it in multiple ways. Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions before we kind of wind up? Great. Well, we'll let Ricky go, but if you have questions specifically for Ricky, feel free to funnel them through me and I'll send them on to him. But thanks for your time, Ricky. Thanks for coming and participating remotely.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam. Thanks, everyone.